So thanks a lot. Thanks again for inviting me today. Sid Faber, lead the ROS Security Working Group, and also the security team at Canonical. It's kind of interesting. At Canonical, we are organized under the Ubuntu security team, the folks that give you patches and updates and so on, because that's kind of where our focus lies. So I want to share some of that with you, kind of share how to enable security within ROS, and that can mean many different things. So kind of to get you started down that path, if you're not familiar with it, share with you some of my experience kind of working in the security industry. My goal is not really to scare you. There's a lot of folks in the security industry that will say the sky is falling. And there's no way to avoid it, and so on and so on. And I kind of don't want to go there, but I want to make you familiar with the landscape that we're dealing with. And probably one of my favorite stories is one about the Target breach. So some of you should be familiar with the Target breach from back in 2013, 2014, around the holidays. Probably many of you got a new credit card as a result of this. But if you hadn't been following, you might not realize that the reason why Target was breached was actually through an HVAC company. And this is not uncommon for something like this to happen, where the breach of an organization is not through the front door or through the server or through the PC, but through some just potentially not even known before avenue into the system. In this case, it was interesting. I had to speak with the Secret Service agent that interviewed the lady that was the root cause, didn't realize it, of the event. And she had opened up an email and clicked on a link, and that compromised her account, which led to access to an account at Target, which then opened up the door where they got access to the point of sale system, compromised point of sale system, and stole lots and lots of credit cards. That's the kind of thing, if you keep that in the back of your mind, that's what we want to avoid. We certainly don't want a robot to be any sort of avenue into something like that. So there's plenty of breaches out there, plenty of activity going on. What does this mean to you? How do you fit? How does your robot fit into this and not be the source of a compromise? Likely your robot is just as capable, at least as a desktop computer, likely a lot more so. And that means you're on the radar of the CIO. That means you may also be on the radar of the CISO, depending on what size of the organization is that you're targeting. It means you're going to be on the IT network, and it means that you have to protect yourself, just like everything else on the IT network needs to be protected. What does that actually mean? And there are ways to get at that, and that's what I want to introduce you to one of the ways. In general, these are considered security frameworks. So there's a number of frameworks out there. Luckily, this has been around for long enough that you can find different security frameworks for different verticals, for different focuses. There are some that focus on the credit card industry, some that focus on banking, banking being generally more mature in a lot of the security areas. There are some that focus on the energy industry. We're going to talk today about the CIS Top 20, which is a framework that's pretty straightforward. I think it's very approachable and very usable, and a great place to start. It's one of the basic frameworks, and all of these frameworks tend to be interoperable. So if you do things for the CIS Top 20, and you present that to another firm, they typically will translate. And you'll see what I mean in just a second. So we're going to take a look at the CIS Top 20 controls. The CIS stands for the Center for Internet Security. They've been around probably since the turn of the century, and it's fairly mature group of controls. And these are just some very basic things that you would do to any computer system to lock it down, and that we can also apply to our robotics systems. These controls are also prioritized. So you have 20 of them. You may not be able to work down the whole list. Some of them actually won't. You'll see they don't apply, particularly to a robot. They'll apply to an enterprise or something along those lines. But it's also the important thing is CIS is consensus driven. It's not driven by a government mandate. It's not driven by a vendor. It's driven by practitioners who actually take these and apply them. And it also has some feedback from people that actually have been compromised, so that they'll feedback and say, had I put this control in place, then I would have been protected. So I think this is a really great place to start. And there's a lot of resources that we can take a look at to do this. But before I go any further, I actually want to step aside for just a second into some definitions. So we use these terms a lot. Security practitioners are, just spend all day talking about these. I want to break this down just a little bit and talk about, we're saying the CIS top 20 controls, but what are controls? Let's go all the way back to where it starts. It starts with a vulnerability. A vulnerability, just simply a weakness in a system. Now, weakness may be a piece of poorly written code. It may be something that's not configured properly, a service that's exposed that shouldn't be exposed. It may be an account that exists that shouldn't exist, or that has a default password. All these tend to be vulnerabilities or some sort of weakness in the system. If I'm able to gain an advantage on that using that vulnerability, that's what's known as an exploit. So I'll exploit a vulnerability so they can actually do something on the target system. And then if I disrupt it to actually cause some sort of loss or value, then that becomes an actual compromise. So just so you understand what the terminology is, we're going to apply controls to prevent compromise. And that may be by closing a vulnerability. It may be by preventing an exploit, something along those lines. But basically, the controls are what we have as our toolkit to secure our robot. And the CIS, again, the CIS top 20 controls are some of those controls that we can put in play to stop things. Now, if you take a look at these are the first 6 controls on this screenshot. You'll see they're very common sense, and they are things that you probably already knew about. So you're probably already on the journey to securing your robot installation. And that's the beauty of the CIS controls. Now, these, in the documentation, they're broken down a lot more, and they'll talk a little bit more about maybe how to do hardware inventory or how to actually assess software versions as part of your software control and management structure, and so on and so on. But still, they again, are very approachable, and the first 6 are kind of all lumped together as the basic controls, as the first set of things that you go after. So now I want to step back again for just a brief second and think about your robot, and you bring it onto the floor, you bring it into a corporate environment. In order to do that, the robot, the enterprise that you're working with is going to have to purchase the robot. So you're going to have something that goes through procurement. And then likely there's going to be some sort of agreement or services agreement or some sort of legal document that underpins what it is that that's being purchased and so on. And also likely somewhere along the way, you're going to need some sort of network connectivity to get the robot connected onto the network. All of these places and many other stops along the way have been turned into triggers for the IT department and or the security department to identify that they've got a new computer system that's coming into the network that needs to be protected, secured, locked down to prevent any sort of compromise. Can't have it become the weak link. So you'll probably notice, at least in some of the larger organizations, that when you go through this process, at some point, even if you didn't want it, you're going to get visited by the IT guys or the security guys that are going to say, tell me if this thing is secure in some sort. They may lay down requirements for you, whatnot, something along those lines. That's actually a good thing, right? Sometimes it feels very painful because now you've got extra work to do, or some other people have gotten into the mix. But in the long run, I think you'll probably benefit from working with that process that then says security. Tell me about security for this system that you're bringing into our environment. And a lot of this actually happens automatically. And what I mean by that is we take a look at the first and second controls, which were all about inventorying hardware and software assets. This slide, actually, the points here are straight from the CIS benchmark, the more detailed description of what this means. But essentially, if you drop your robot into the environment, it's going to show up on the physical hardware control, inventory documents. It's also going to show up likely on the network as a software asset as well. Once it gets connected to the network, typically the security team is going to scan it. Most organizations, the network is being scanned every day or potentially once a week to discover the devices on the network. And then once it identifies them, see if they're new devices or where they're at in the inventory. And then oftentimes the scanner will try to connect in through a known account. So you may have to or be asked to give an account to the scanning device, or some other sort of configuration, or drop some software on there. So that way a scanner, an inventory scanner, software and hardware inventory scanner, can actually scan your device. Keep in mind at this point, to the security department, to the IT department, this likely looks just like another computer on the network, another Linux box, just another box. And then once it's scanned, the scanning tool typically will inventory all the software and the hardware and the versions of things that are running on there, all with the point of looking to see if anything is unpatched. So looking for up-to-date software on the machine. And this actually relates into the third control that comes in our framework, which is continuous vulnerability management. In this case, there's an up-to-date vulnerability scanner that looks for this new device on the network that has vulnerabilities, scan it to see if there's any patches that need to be applied. This is the big question of, are you patched? And as I'm sure you're aware, patching comes in many flavors. There's operating system patches, there's application patches, and then all the supporting software patches as well. If you look at the ways machines have been compromised in the past, and corporations have been compromised, and accounts and personal data has been lost, a lot of it does come back to patching, known vulnerabilities that exist that weren't updated on the machine. So this fits right into your framework. Just a little side note, this is where I wanted to spend a lot of time, and this is where we're working with Open Robotics to make sure we can keep your robot patched long after the standard support cycle's gone, is done. So your robot's not going to last 5 years. Ubuntu may only be, if you're up to date, you run an LTS, Ubuntu's only going to run for 5 years. We want to give you longer time with that. So that's some of the extended support offerings that we're looking for, all towards this securing the robot and making sure it's patched. So there's a number of other controls that you'll see that come out, obviously 20 controls for the CIS top 20. I don't want to go through all of them. I think I'll stop there because I think the documentation is really well written. Actually, let me flip over to their website briefly. Um, and this is all free and open for you to access. Um, So if you see, this is the website, cisecurity.org, and the controls that are grouped into some different maturity levels here, inventory of the assets, and then there's like, for instance, if we dig down into continuous vulnerability management a little bit, you'll see there's a lot more here. There's a video specific on that, some main points. There's spreadsheets and even more detailed documents to go with that as well. Other things that exist here in addition to vulnerability management, you'll see account management, use of administrative privileges, who has root access to your robot, so on and so on. Again, some of these very rote things that you're familiar with, let's roll that all together into a robotic security program and then call this robot secure as well. There's one last thing I did also want to point out. One of these controls is actually a standard secure configuration. It's where we put a little bit of effort into creating the CIS benchmark for ROS Melodic. This is for ROS Melodic running on Ubuntu, and it's derived largely from the Ubuntu benchmark, which we maintain, which is just a straightforward secure configuration for Ubuntu, and it works with ROS running on top of it. Gets into more details about which services you should turn off and which accounts you should lock down and which directories you should protect, and so on and so on. So I'd encourage you to take a look at that. That also is open for you, free to download from CIS. So I think with that said, I'm going to pause there. That's about all the content I had, because I just wanted to, again, give you a brief overview and give you some room if you have any questions. Remind you that security is more than just simply patching or updating. There's a lot to it, but also that there's resources out there, and the resources are in terms of the security frameworks. And some of them are very approachable. If you don't have one to start with, CIS Top 20 is a very good one to start with, and you can cherry pick which of these would apply to your robot. So I'll pause there. I'm going to take a second to take a look at the chat. And Sarah, I don't know if you have anything else to add.
Looks like you've got a question from Haish. He was wondering, what do we do with OEM industrial controllers? They don't run Ubuntu, Linux, or ROS.
Yeah, so excellent question, and one that I personally cannot answer, but I will send you in the community that does handle that. Let me make sure I get this here. The industrial controllers. So this is.
We can send you that question.
Yeah, for some reason I'm blanking on it. There is a community that handles security for the non-OS type of robotics. So yeah, let me get back to you on that. Thank you.